We're going to have Dalya, who did the communion book, worked very hard on it, introduce to you the concepts behind it, how to use it, and how to make the best of the very short time we have teaching communion this year. Okay, welcome, Dalya.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So, no pressure, but I've told this to Father Andy before. I think communion is actually the most important part of what this church does. It's the only time you get every single person in the diocese come and actually, you get to talk to them, you get to work with them, because you don't know if they come every week at Sunday Mass. Maybe the next time they come is at their wedding, but communion is the only time you get everybody. So I consider communion, some may disagree, but the most important thing, which is why I took this book so seriously. I've been teaching communion for about 10 years. I'm also a middle and high school teacher, and I worked on this book in 2020 with Rena and Father Andrew. So I tried to make this a little funny. I really like The Office, but my gifts didn't work, so it's not as funny, but that's okay. So, reminder before teaching, this is the first thing I learned when I got my master's in education. The first thing I was ever taught was you cannot teach a class anything, any content. You can't teach them the basic things if you don't have classroom management under control. So the talk that you just heard before this, Norse talk, is extremely important because if you don't have a classroom under control, do not think that you can teach them much. You might get to a few students, but not to everybody. And the point of this is to get to everybody. If you miss one student, that means that student was not given what they needed. So please consider all students. So, what's the difference between the new book and the old book? So, it contains an introduction chapter. It contains graphic organizers within the book where students can actually write and interact with the material. And third, it contains portions where students actually write and reflect to God. Okay? So, that means that this is going to be a little different from what you've ever done before because this book contains these graphic organizers, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about that. So, what is this book trying to do? A lot of times when I used the old books, they were amazing, but I usually liked teaching 5th graders because one year I taught 4th graders and 3rd graders. The reading level was very difficult. Not to say that this book has a perfect reading level, but the reading level was very difficult. So I'm trying to, in this book, target all reading levels. Number 2, provide background knowledge. There were so many times where I started communion and I started talking about this place named Israel, and talking about Israel, Jerusalem, Nazareth, until one day a kid was like, where is that? What are you talking about? And I'm like, gosh, I've been talking about this thing for like 3 weeks, and they don't even know it's like a country in the Middle East, all of this stuff. So it contains a lot of background knowledge. And then it's trying to target all types of learners. Not everybody learns by just talking at them. The majority of the time when I first started teaching communion, I would just talk at the kids. I probably got to about 30% of them. When you're trying to teach students, you want to make sure you're targeting the auditory learners, the visual learners, and the students that need to actually do something like writing. So, let's talk about reading levels. So, always at the beginning, and I kept this the same, there is a Bible passage at the beginning of every chapter, and that was the same in the old book, same in the new book. However, there's parts where I actually put what does this word mean in context? So a word like, can't think of one off the top of my head, but words, can mean different types of things depending on how you use them in the sentence. So there is a Bible passage, there is word meanings right next to it. There's an example for you on the screen. This is from chapter 1, the existence of God. So those are the words I pre-thought and said, what are the words that I think the students are going to have trouble with? Words are plain, eternal, deity, perceived. These are, middle school, high school level words. The reading level for the Bible is pretty difficult. So I tried to knock it down a little bit and try to help them out and try to define words. So before you even begin teaching them, you want to define what these words are. And then afterwards, there are some guiding questions for them in the reflect portion. So this was about seeing God. This whole passage is about seeing where God is in the world, right? And seeing God through nature. So the first question is, what is plain for people to see? How is it plain for us to see? And what does the author of this writing want us to look at especially? Okay? So there are some guiding questions there for you. It's always good to not just give the answer to students always. It's good to guide them. It's good to ask them, what do you think this is? What do you think the author is trying to say? Okay? So that's what I was trying to do in targeting reading levels. And I tried to change the vocabulary in this as much as I could to a vocabulary that's a little bit more accessible to everybody, but there's still a lot of difficult things in here, just warning you. Background knowledge. Please never, never, never assume that a student knows something. Repeat background knowledge. Even if you've repeated it like 30 times, just do it again. Remind students of what they've learned. It is connected to what you were teaching. So this is an example from the introduction chapter. What I was talking about this place named Israel and all of this stuff. So in the introduction chapter, there's a map. There's here's a map of the world. Now here's a map of the Middle East. This is where Jesus was from. And then after this in the book, there's even a map of Israel. So you can always refer to it and go back to it as you're teaching the students. So I know that later in the book, you're going to be talking about Jesus going into Jerusalem. I would recommend, hey, everybody, let's go back to this introduction chapter. Let's look at the map of Israel. Let's find where Jerusalem is. Okay, that's where Jesus was in this time period, right? So there's a lot of things in here to try to help the students kind of just conceptualize what was happening during this time. There's also a graph that also has the students understand BC and AD. That's really difficult for anybody to understand. I still teach my high school students that. Teaching students that this happened a long time ago, that Jesus wasn't around during Abraham. One time, just for fun, we had some time. I'm like, so how long after was Jesus with Abraham? They're like, wasn't he around at the same time? And I'm like, no, many, many, many years passed in between them. So even just teaching students how far away people were from each other as far as life and death and all of that stuff. So background knowledge is really key. We never want to assume that a student knows anything. And targets all types of learners. This is an example from the book of the 10 Commandments. So goes through the first commandment, and it has a part where you discuss with the students, how does this connect to me? You shall not kill. There's going to be a part where you're going to ask the students, so what does that mean you can't do? So it talks about fighting, talks about, bullying, different things like that. It might say, you shall not steal. What does that mean? It can also connect to cheating, things like that. So you're actually having the students write in this book as you are communicating with them so that they can hear what you're saying, they can see what you're doing, and also actually write. So that's what I mean by trying to connect to all types of learners. Okay, how is this book broken up? It's pretty similar to how the other book was broken up, but it's mostly into 4 parts. The first part is read and reflect. That's the Bible passage part and asking questions about the Bible. So this is your opportunity to define words like I had mentioned and also delve into the chapter. Part 2 is the learn part. This is the actual content. This is really important because this is the actual facts and information that we're giving to the students. Several graphic organizers made to support their learning. Part 3 is live. So this is where this is something new I incorporated. It kind of new, but this is where you're actually going to sit and let the students write and talk to God. So if you look in your book, if you want to go look at it, page 51. Page 51 in the book talks about Christmas and how God was simple. We want to emphasize that during Christmas time because Christmas can get very not simple. So there's a reflection question. It says, what can you do to make sure you are simple during Christmas time? And what I would do in my classes, I would just sit and say, talk to God, go. And I want complete silence in this room. Just write, this is your personal thing, you talk to God. So give the students some time to do this. And then afterwards, if there are any brave souls, I always say, does anybody want to share? Kids are really great about sharing. So that's an example of one of the questions in the live part. So this is actually how it's applicable to their lives. Also go to part, or if you would like to look, go to page 56. So this is a way I plan on repenting and living like Jesus, because this chapter talks a lot about repentance. So it's actually, this is saying, talking to God. So this is a form of prayer that I like my students to get used to, of just talking to God like he's your friend. So it's like, God, one way I plan on repenting and living like you is by. And then I want to do this because. So that's the live part, I think, is personally the most important part of the book. This is where they actually get to make that connection and just like alone time with God and their thoughts. And this hopefully develops habits, because that's what we want. We want to develop habits of connecting with God. And then part 4 is the pray part. This is just like every other year. This is a part that this is a prayer they're supposed to learn for that week. So for example, on page 56, it's the Hail Mary. So that's the prayer that they need to make sure that they learn. Typically from the old book, I just kept it the same as the old books, typically 3 weeks for each prayer. So there is a teacher copy and a student copy. You all have the teacher copy. On the board or on the projector, you can see side by side the same page of what a teacher copy and a student copy would be. Anything is red in this teacher book will be blank in their book. Please make sure the students write down the information. So for example, this is a graphic organizer teaching about the Trinity. There are how many gods? And then in their book, that part's going to be blank. So you write 1, right? So this is actually them interacting, having to memorize that there is one God. It is very difficult to just tell students to write something. I can't tell you how many times when I first started making these graphic organizers for communion, I'd have one kid like, how do you spell Jesus? And I'm like, okay, J-E-S-U-S. And then somebody else is like, did I write this correctly? Can you come look at my book? Wait, how'd you spell Jesus? And it like took about like 20 minutes just to get through one graphic organizer. So I found a better way to actually do this through trial and error. But all of those classrooms have projectors. So my recommendation, and what I will actually tell you, it's going to be very difficult if you don't do it this way. Project the student copy on the board and actually write with them. So then they can see, you don't have to do any spelling. I always tell them, like, don't worry about spelling, but some kiddos are just very, into that. So projecting on the board the student copy again, and you have the teacher copy in your hand, so you have all the answers, and you can just write down what they are. So, it's a COVID year for communion. These chapters were not meant to be done in half a year. There are about, I think, 24 chapters in here, and it was meant to be done with, with the reflection, with taking your time, actually letting kids delve into like who God is, our relationship with him, because that's like the big thing with this book, right? So that can't happen this year. We're going to have to bring together about 2 to 3 chapters. Unfortunately, that's not possible in the amount of time that you're given. So I'm going to be speaking with the leaders, depending on how many chapters you're going to be doing each week. I've already been talking to Sylvia about it. We're going to have to cut out some graphic organizers. Some things are just going to need to be said pretty quickly. Some, like maybe students make some notes in their book, something like that. But your leaders are going to advise you on what to do, because a lot of these chapters can't be done you can't do like 3 chapters for 45 minutes. So some things are going to have to be condensed just for this year. Be patient with the students. This is a lot of information to retain in like 3-4-ish months. And then also, if you really, really, really want to look at the key points and make sure that you want to tell the students everything that they should have learned that week, look at the homework book, because the homework book is basically the very key fine points that I do not want the students leaving without knowing that information. So for example, one of the communion, like such an important thing. How many gods do we have? We have one God. That is a very key question that is asked. Or what is the Trinity? What are the parts of the Holy Trinity? Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Those are the key points that are in the homework book. So it's like, okay, don't let the kids leave without at least knowing what's in the homework. Homework. Okay, so there is a homework book. It's currently being made. They're going to be printed out weekly for you to give to the students. Again, this is key information that's in the chapter. So we added something new to the communion homework book this year. Every year when I went to the communion masses, I enjoyed watching the bishop lecture the parents for a little bit. And I was like, he's really trying to make the parents involved in communion. I thought, I wish there was a way we can get them involved all throughout the year. So the last questions in the homework book are actually meant for students to do with their parents. So, for example, it says, this was from, I believe, chapter 2, and it talks about my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. I said, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit love each other very much. How can your family show that they love each other? So this is something that the students, it says, read the following passage and do it with your parents, answer it with your parents. So this is meant to be like a family activity, something that they can do with their parents, and hopefully it kind of delves into their family life, or at least gives them something to talk about as a family. So, and then at the end of after every chapter, the parents actually have to sign that the kid did the homework, because I want the parents to actually look at the homework. Did they do it? What are they answering? So the parents actually have to sign off afterwards, because a lot of times, sometimes we have difficulties with students doing homework. So at least when we get the parents to interact, that's a good thing too. This is not the final edition of this book, because there will never be a final edition. Every time I teach a lesson in my class, I rip it apart and I fix it for my next class, and then the next year I'm going to teach it, and the next year. So there's never, ever, ever a perfect lesson. These lessons will always be, I've already found like 30 things I've wanted to change with this book, and it's like killing me inside, but I'll survive. But if you think that there's something crucial missing from this, like let's just say you're working with your students and you're like, hey, this word was really hard for them to understand, you can always send me an email and just be like, hey, for the next edition, can you possibly put this? Or, I noticed that the students were really having a difficulty understanding a mortal soul. Is that something we can incorporate into the next book as well? So if you actually have recommendations for me, I would really appreciate it, because I'm currently working on editing this book for the next one when we order the next set. We're probably going to be using these for hopefully this year and just next year, maybe the year after. But I want to get to the next version as quickly as possible so that we can make this book as best as possible. I don't know if Father Andy talked about this. Please do not guess when a student asks you a question they don't know. You don't understand how many times the students have wanted me to give a dissertation on what heaven is like. I'm like, I don't know. And they're like, who's there? Who didn't make it? Who did make it? And I'm like, I take out my catechism. I'm like, I'm going to read to you everything I know about heaven. And they just want to know all these things. So I do not guess from what I saw on YouTube one day. A lot of times they tell me about a woman whose statue was crying and all of this stuff. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. I'm like, that's great. But you also have to just be really careful about things that you learn and about things that you read, because the kids come to us with a lot of misinformation, because we have this wonderful thing called the internet, and they've just been learning a lot of things that are actually inaccurate. I actually like to start all my lessons with, what do you already know about this? Because then I can actually clear up things that's misinformation. So please be careful about that. When I was making this book, I've taught this book for 10 years, but even when I was making this version of the book, I had like a million questions to ask Father Andy, and that I had to Google and all of that stuff. So you just got to be really, really, really careful with the information that you give to the students. My favorite answer to the students is, I don't know, let's move on. And I said, I will get you this answer next week. So please do not ever feel weird about that. Just say, I don't know.
Let me make a couple last comments. Thank you again for everything that you're doing here. So this whole set of talks has been recorded, and people from all over the diocese are going to be watching it. So the policies that we have in place about about COVID restrictions that Sylvia talked about, the classroom management that Nur talked about, the stuff that I was saying at the beginning, the stuff that Father Danny was telling you, the stuff that Dalya was saying about the communion book. This is a diocese-wide policy. It's not just something that St. Peter's or just St. Michael's or just St. John's is going to be doing. We're all doing this under the direction of the bishop and the officers that he's put into place. So understand that we're sort of all in this together. Coordinating this is not going to be very easy, especially with, for example, the homework book that we're going to be pumping out week by week, especially because this year is going to be so weird. We have to concentrate the material so much because we have half the time that we have had before. The options would have been not do communion at all this year, which is kind of denying children the sacraments for another year. That already last year it was delayed for so long because of COVID and stuff. The other option would have been, well, we're going to do our best with the time that we have, which is really, the sister kind of asked me a really related question to that at the beginning. That's all we ever do, is do the best with the time that we have. So it's just humility to say, I'm limited, and but even though I'm limited, I'm still going to do my best. And that's really what we're going to try to do this year. Now, I want to ask, I'm going to crowdsource this. What we need right now is somebody to help on a weekly basis translate. It's only going to end up being a few sentences every week, but translate the homework book into Arabic so that when they come home, the parents that don't know English well, like at a lot of our parishes, will be able to read it and talk to their students about it. So if you would like to do that, if you know Arabic well enough, or if you know somebody who might be able to do that, who's educated in Arabic well, please come and contact me as soon as you can in the next few days, if not the next week. Okay, so I'll just throw that out there. Hopefully we can find somebody pretty soon. Are there any questions about any of the material that you learned today that I can talk to you about? We're way ahead of schedule, so we're literally over an hour ahead, so I'm really happy about that. How are you guys feeling? Are you enthusiastic? Are you rising to the challenge? Are you discouraged? There's a very small difference between hope and despair. Did you know that? The way you define hope and the way you define despair, they both have to do with something good that you want, but it's difficult to get. The way you define both hope and despair. So there's some good, there's something that you're trying to get, but it's hard to get there. What's the difference between hope and despair? It's just the way you think about it. If you're going to despair, what you do is you think about how hard it is. If you want to give up on something, just think about how hard it is. If you want to have hope and fight to get what you're really trying to get, think about how good it is and how much you want it. And the fact that these are children that we're going to be bringing Christ to is something that's infinitely good. Whatever is in front of you, don't be discouraged. Think about how good it is to bring Christ into somebody's heart and into your own, and that should, I think, kind of get you through whatever comes in the next year. All right? All right, let's stand up and we'll pray together one last time, and let you guys go home. B'Shem Babo, Brona, Ruhat Qudsha. Shlama Ellach Maryam, Nitha Naama, Maran Ummach, Borachtab Inshe, Borkhele Peret Kasach Isha, Mat Maryam, Yemmedalah, Salim Badalan, Akhni Hattai, Dahab, Shuhata Baba, Ubrona, Ruhat Qudsha. God bless you all, and all of you that are watching online. Thank you all.